it started a compartmentalization of the notion of like a craving that is both the foundation of humanity, right? What's the one thing you can say about every person that is on the same branch of your family tree that came before you? You don't know if they could speak. You don't know if they could walk. You don't know if they could talk. You know that they had sex.
All right, let's go ahead and jump in. Today we are talking with Bryant Paul. Bryant has spent over 2 decades studying how digital media transforms human sexuality and intimacy. He's a faculty affiliate at the Kinsey Institute, and his work has been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court. Welcome to the show, Bryant.
Thanks so much for having me.
Bryant, so can you just talk a little bit about your work and how it relates to our manifesto?
I have been studying the social and psychological effects of sexual communication for going close to 30 years now. As your manifesto, I think, talks about, it has evolved over time. It started out just interested in the effects of pornography, honestly, and that drew me into in the late 90s, early 2000s, into a lot of research on the impact of sexually oriented businesses, strip clubs and adult bookstores, because cities were trying to close them down based on the fact that they had these what they call negative secondary effects. So effects that were not related directly to the business, but that brought crime in or lowered property values. And for years, the courts had assumed that was a reasonable assumption. And we ended up looking at all the data that they had collected on this stuff, and wasn't the case at all. If there was any evidence, the evidence suggested that these places were actually beneficial to most of the neighborhoods that they moved into, probably because they don't move into neighborhoods. They move into business areas that are usually kind of economically depressed. Then once I got to IU, while I was doing my graduate work, I was very interested in how technology, particularly online technology, because that was really I'm actually kind of lucky. I'm made for this kind of research in that I grew up. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm a rare breed. But as I was growing up, the transition to digital occurred. So I know
both sides.
I know how to use a phone and how it works. Which most people know one or the other. And so I was really interested in this notion that there's this desperate craving, especially when you hit puberty, and these messages saying both it's desirable. It's something like, here it is. We can use it to sell. We can use it to get people to do things. We can use it to get people's attention. It started a compartmentalization of the notion of like a craving that is both the foundation of humanity, right? What's the one thing you can say about every person that is on the same branch of your family tree that came before you? You don't know if they could speak. You don't know if they could walk. You don't know if they could talk. You know that they had sex. And I'll talk about this hopefully a little bit later, but it's such a fundamental thing that we're carrying around in our skulls the same brains that cavemen and cave people carried around in theirs. And so we are not built for the mediated environment that we exist in now at all, cognitively. And so we're really and that became sort of the foundational position from which I started studying this stuff. How does the caveman brain process today's mediated environment? And it's just not working out particularly well in a lot of cases.
Evolution's not happening.
Evolution. I mean, it is happening, but it doesn't happen during a generation, right? And so we're using a dated computing system, in essence, processing system, to live in a world that just, in large part, in our more base instincts, doesn't make a lot of sense. We don't have a media detection mechanism in our brains, so we have to develop that. We have to learn that. That's why media literacy becomes so important.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's literally teaching people. We teach people to read. We teach them to do math. We teach them to speak foreign languages. But we don't teach them to do well the one thing we do the most, which is communicate through media. The scariest thing I can hear is, well, I know it's not real. When they say, I know it's not real, I always think, oh, you do, but there's so much. The fact that you're watching it means that you're still incorporating it. It means that, for instance, if you watch Love Island or Love is Blind, all these popular programs, like, oh, that's not what real relationships are like. But it does have an impact on how much you should be kissing, how interested in sex you should be, how the basis of what a relationship is supposed to be about. Those subtexts are what we incorporate into our scripts.
Yeah. So you talked about like the effects and things of that nature. So the people in the organizations who are in control of this technology, is it intentional for them to create these kind of conversations around these types of desires?
That's a great question. Yes, of course. I mean, they've realized, look, the marketing industry, the entertainment industry is an industry that in essence is trying to rent your attention. They're giving you content that gets your attention and then doing kind of a bait and switch. One of the things that's, I don't want to say troubling, but is I think really interesting is in recent years, because of the siloing that's taken place, right? You can watch politics that's only in your lane. You can watch content that is only interesting to you.
Just like the echo chamber. Absolutely.
Yeah, the media echo chamber. So I've kind of started to, it used to be like there was a mass medium, right? There were mass media. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there are anymore.
It's so splintered. Everybody
has their own media ecosystem. So when we say, let's do a survey of 1,000 people, well, who cares, right? We can kind of get an idea of where they're coming from, but everybody has such a different experience now. And that was the idea of the mass media, where that everybody kind of had the same experience, at least generally. And now the only sameness is that we're all having a different experience.
That's fascinating.
Especially nowadays with social media, a lot of their systems, they have algorithms, and those algorithms are based on the accounts you're following, the type of content that you're engaging with. So it's definitely a different experience for everyone, and it's not really something that can be measured in the same way, like you were saying, like a survey.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. I think there are ways of studying it. It's just gotten a lot harder. And I think when you study it from a psychological perspective and you use social science, we talk about what are known as individual differences.
Like tribes.
Absolutely. And you can do it by socioeconomic status. You can do it by interests, hobbies. You can do it by age. You can do it by fetishes. If you're talking about sex and sexuality, you can talk about sexual preferences. So you can group those people. And that's really what marketing has become, and public relations and advertising has become, is just breaking audiences into micro audiences. And the only thing that you really need is a big enough micro audience with enough money to be worth giving them some attention.
Yeah, and I feel like for what you're saying, Jax, like that sort of algorithm leads to that fabricated reality. It's not really real, but it feels very real.
It reinforces your pre-existing expectations. And so that's why, we talk about kids. It's so important to step in. I've become of the mind, and I wasn't like this early on when social media started to become a thing. No kid needs to be on social media before 16, even 18.
Yeah.
We see an increasing number of college students that say, I hate social media, right? And then you say, well, do you use it? Yeah, I have to. How else am I going to? But I've had parents tell me, well, I can't keep them off TikTok. They'll fall behind their friends. I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Let them. They won't fall behind. They'll jump in front.
Yeah. And if they see things that they shouldn't be seeing, and exposes them.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is you think you have control because you're moderating what you think they're seeing. But again, those subtexts, if you're moderating, I've watched things with my kids and afterwards woken up in the middle of the night and thought, wait, that wasn't a great message. I need to talk to them about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I've got some training in this area. So, and I try and tell people, like, you really got to counter program to your kids' media experiences. And so many kids that come in, so much of the anxiety that's happening in the world right now is, and that's a big part of it too. And we talked about this extensively. Yeah, we love negative information. We love to hate it. it's one of those things that if you, especially in politics, for instance, if you get information not about how great the person you or the people or the side that you support is, but how terrible the others are, that actually lights up your pleasure centers in the same way that, and often more than hearing how great the positions of those that you follow are hold. And think about it for a second. If you're walking down the street and on one side of the street there's a burning building, on the other side of the street there's a bucolic field with bunnies and deers and deer and all that, which one should you pay attention to?
Yeah. Isn't that the limbic system, though? Just basically,
yes. Yeah, absolutely. It's what kept us alive.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't realize that every thought you have, every cognition that you have in the neocortex, that information has to pass through the limbic system.
Mm-hmm.
So nearly all information that you experience, that you process, is already tainted with an emotion. Right, and we get some juice out of it. We get some positive feelings. Some dopamine is released, and not to oversimplify because that term is completely overused, and misused actually. But we feel good about avoiding. Why are scary movies pleasant? Why do people like scary movies? Why do we like true crime? It's horrible, right? What happened to those people? Because now we feel maybe that we're less likely to fall victim to it. We see that justice was served, the crime was solved, so we feel a little bit safer. So we are much more prone to pay attention to. In fact, in essence, if you think about our nervous systems, they're kind of negative information detection mechanisms. Mm-hmm. What is the thing that could hurt us, right? We only really can learn and become an advance, and as you talked about in your manifesto, and evolve culturally and individually. If we are calm, if we have time to give thoughts and cognition to our better angels, and keeping us in a complete state of panic all the time is the media's job. It's always what can knock you. We talked about this extensively in a lot of our classes here in the media school. The notion of automaticity. We are overwhelmed with information, mediated information, constant. It used to be we talk about the real world versus the mediated world. Today, it's just the world.
So you kind of like touched on a topic I wanted to talk about as far as reality and overuse of information and information overload. Also, another thing that I've noticed, especially in our generation, is like people will use artificial intelligence like ChatGPT to avoid negative outcomes instead of like reality and being like a human.
Okay, that's a great question. Yeah. I think that is, again, there's research that's showing that people prefer to talk to algorithms.
When you say algorithms, do you mean chatbot? Like
yes, I literally mean
like
ChatGPT.
bots. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, algorithm-driven artificial intelligence in essence.
Right.
Yeah, I think we do see it. We're starting to see a lot of virtual or AI-generated pornography. Not a lot, but more of it. To my mind, it's not as it borders on the uncanny valley still. So which is the idea that if
can you say what for our listeners what the uncanny valley is?
Sure, it's the idea that when AI and things that are created that are not real, quote unquote real, whatever that word is going to mean in another 5 years, but mediated and generated things, robots and things like that. When they get closer and closer to being real looking and you can't tell the difference, we become more and more uncomfortable. We become more and more untrusting of them. It becomes very unnerving to people when technology starts to mimic reality.
I would think it'd be the opposite.
Yeah, I think. Well, here's the thing. I think it's a detection because it's a detection device, a protection device that we don't want to be fooled. Right, and so the closer it gets, when you still know that it's not real, the more uncomfortable we become because we're thinking, how close are we to me actually falling for this?
Right. So I read that like Gen Alpha and people who grow up in a fully digital world will rely more on artificial intelligence.
I think it's a tool, and a very valuable one, a very powerful one. It's a reality enhancer. But you need to make sure that young people, as they're growing up, aren't solely relying on it. I think there is a very there's a great book that was written by a guy I studied under at NYU, Neil Postman, called "Amusing Ourselves to Death," and his argument was kind of that he was a McLuhan media determinist, and he basically said you don't have to worry about 1984 and the Big Brother is watching, although maybe you do as well. But what he was saying was that you have to worry more about a Brave New World type of thing, where everybody is so entertained and everything is so perfect, and you're always avoiding anything that's annoying or makes you feel uncomfortable.
Utopia, not dystopia.
Right. Which actually is you're living in a dystopia without realizing it. Just relying on technology it's going to dull our senses. It does. It's one of those things. I see this in class every day that I teach. Right. When I've actually had guest speakers come in and sat next to a student in my class, went up in the back, and the person was sitting there watching golf, shopping, and responding to texts. They never wrote a thing down. I'm just thinking, why are you even here?
Yeah.
There's a fine line between passion and addiction. And the only thing is that when people get to that line, they struggle to tell which side they're on. How do you see that line? Do you think it's more of a gray area, or do you think it's a fine line?
I think it's in terms of information consumption and most what we call process style addictions, which are more the psychological addictions as opposed to. In fact, there's a pretty good number of folks that argue that process addictions are it's a very gray line. Do you know who I've read some stuff about the number one the people that think that they are most likely to be addicted to pornography use? Ultra religious individuals.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
But what's even more interesting is when you ask them how much they use, it's very little. And so,
but is that true?
Okay, that's a fair question.
Yeah.
I think, but they'll say, well, how often are you using this stuff? And they'll say, well, a couple of times a month or whatever. But the issue becomes, are you comfortable with your use? Right? Number one, are you dysfunctional in your own mind? Number two, are you dysfunctional socially? So I think that it's a different line for different people. There are certainly people that become very wrapped up in it. It's a very trendy thing to call it addiction. So when you ask about the issue of addiction and kind of loss of control, I think it's a totally legitimate thing to be concerned about. But I do believe it's a very fuzzy, moving target that depends on the individual. And that's a lot of the research that I have, when I've looked into this issue, shows, actually, it's not so much of an addiction issue. It's that people that consume more pornography have higher libidos, right? Just like, people that have higher levels of sensation seeking are more likely to skydive, are more likely to scuba dive, are more likely to bungee jump, are more likely to watch sexually explicit material. So it's a much fuzzier question than just a fine line.
And what do you think people that have these habits are actually seeking? Do you think that's more of just the content itself, or do you think there's something deeper than that, maybe neurologically, that they're seeking? Or
I think we like pleasure.
Yeah.
And so, and that's, I think, when you all reached out to me about coming in, that was one of the big things was, the idea that pleasure is so easily accessible through media. Will we reach a point where it's easier to get your sexual satisfaction from media than from other people? Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I think, is the crux of the difference between pleasure and intimacy. Is it eroding intimacy?
Right. And that's where the AI potentially, I think, has the potential to play a role. When you start falling in love with or feeling like you have a relationship with these technologies, right, these technological entities, then we may start to see some concern. I will mention one thing about AI-generated pornography. I don't think AI-generated pornography is as worrisome as some people make it out to be. I think what is potentially worrisome is the combination of that with extrasensory devices and technology. So what's something called teledildonics or haptic feedback sexual devices. So you can, if you go on to Live Jasmine or Chatterbait or whatever, they're using these devices that have it's a vibrator. Those vibrators, you can, like on Chatterbait, you can pay tokens and push a button and increase the speed or decrease the speed of the vibrator. They have other ones that you can get that you can use with an individual. There was a Wii attachment years ago that you could, I showed it in class, that you could use, and you could be on the other side of the world and control your sexual interaction with somebody. Now, here's where it gets a little tricky. So what we've got these now they make very, very lifelike dolls, right? We're coming up with more technology that allows them to kind of interact. You've got you can make their sex organs way more stimulating than the actual human sexual organs, right? I mean, I can't vibrate at 120 hertz no matter what I do, right? But a machine can. And so they can make stimulation that our bodies really weren't designed to respond to, but feel great, right? And so, I mean, it's the same thing as like opioids, right? They're creating an environment that like never existed. We're over. Well, sex is a very powerful drive, and we don't have sex when you are having sex. Most of the time, especially when younger, you're not thinking, "I'm making a baby."
Right.
You're thinking, "This feels great."
Yeah.
Right. I am enjoying this bonding situation. I'm enjoying the experience. And so is it going to just go away? Are we going to find something that's so much better than that we just do away with the other part? And I think I can see a time when interperson sex is something of a fetish. It's some people's
that's
kink.
Crazy.
Right?
Yeah.
But those will be the people that will. And that's the thing. Those that have a tendency to do things that lead them to procreate will flourish. Those that don't will not. There's a book, actually, I can't remember who wrote it. It's called The Good Old Days Weren't as Good as They Seem or something like that. And, if we want to return to it, I don't want to get political, but the maximum tax rate back then was like 90% on the highest tax people. So you want to return to all that stuff, let's do it, right? But let's not. So I think the issue becomes fear of change. What you grew up knowing, and this used to very much be the case because technology didn't move this fast, and this is where our brains are not made for this. We're so badly designed for the idea that the technology doubles in speed every 18 months, right, in terms of processing power and things like that. So we are in a period where our brains are confused, and it makes us feel uneasy.
I noted in your biography that some of your work has been cited by the Supreme Court, which shows that it's not just something personal, but also constitutional. What might that tell us about the stakes of what we're dealing with and how it's something on a much more of a level such as a constitutional one?
That's a big question.
That's a whole podcast right there.
Yeah, it really is. But it's a great question. I mean, it really is. It's a great question. You guys have asked really interesting questions. Thank you. I think what I tend to see with the judiciary is, and where I got involved with that is, I've always been of the mind that I have this stupid saying. I say no regulation without proof of causation. A lot of reactionary politics and reactionary laws are, well, I don't like the way things are headed, right? And so they say, well, I'm going to be gone someday, but I want the world to be like it was when I was here. And so they put down a marker that says, this law says you can't do this even when I'm gone. And the courts, I think, are there to consider the constitutionality and whatever, and what that means is it's supposed to be a balancing test of what is best for society versus what allows individuals their personal liberty. The courts are supposed to consider that and come up with a ruling that serves all parties, I think, as best as it can. And so there is a definite concern on the part of some individuals that letting us have at it with no guardrails is a big problem. in certain areas of our life. And sex is one of those areas, particularly in our society, because we're raised, I think a lot of the reason that younger people they become rather porn averse, actually, but they still like sexual content, just not so in your face. They'll also just go watch it and then go do another thing. It used to, right? It's not, so they don't talk about it. I used to do a lot of research specifically on pornography use, and now it's like, there's so many other things. What are you really studying? So I think the fact that the courts are getting involved in all this stuff shows that our craving to be comfortable, our desire to feel safe, like the world's going to be okay even when we're not here anymore, is something that really matters to people. And what it shows you is that what we want at some level is what we think is best for ourselves.
That's the ultimate craving, right?
The ultimate craving is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is to make sure those things are satisfied. And the fact that we deal with these kind of what I would say fringe issues, like should we allow people to be on TikTok or kids to be on TikTok? Think about how great we're doing. And I'm sorry to be overly optimistic again, but
no, I actually am pleasantly surprised by it. It's interesting.
But think of how great we're doing if we're not worried about food and shelter to the degree that we are like, and although some people are obviously, but that we can talk about, should young people have access to a social media environment that is unregulated? That to me says, wow, we've got the basics pretty well covered, right?
That's interesting.
We're moving towards. I think we are. It gives us. I think we should take some solace in that when we're worrying about what a mess the world is. There are places in the world where they don't get to do that. They just wonder, and even in this country, where's my next meal coming from? The fact that as a society in the United States that we're able to have those conversations, I take some positivity out of that. It seems to me that, like, despite all the doom and gloom, and that's one of the things I worry about the most with our field, is that everybody's like, oh, media, it's all terrible. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it really? Or do we get we're having this conversation right now. I think this is great, right? That shows we have a whole university. We have a whole school.
Yeah, I'm just curious, are you guys surprised by this conversation?
I'm very, very surprised.
Really?
Well, more so because I don't see it as as optimistic, not as detrimental, but just as far as I guess it comes down to what you said, individual perspectives. Mm-hmm. The way I see it just might be different.
Completely. And I would just put to you that I think that a lot of that is the media doom and gloom.
Yeah.
We are presented with so much negativity, right? We focus on so much of this is terrible and that's terrible.
And our brains love that.
That is something I think you could potentially say we're addicted to.
Mm-hmm. Negativity.
Yeah, negativity. Because we have to, right? You've got to avoid that burning house. So you've got to remember the burning house isn't actually there.
I think this was a great conversation. I definitely would like to pick your brain more afterwards.
I know, it makes me want to.
I definitely have perspectives that I think could probably be different from yours. But it's interesting
and
to talk about.
And I welcome that.
Yeah.
I think that's another really important point is don't run away from perspectives that differ from your own, right? You don't have to like them,
right?
But you need to hear them because it's the only way you're going to understand or potentially help other people. If you really think you're right, then it's probably in your interest to help them understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
It was really great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. This episode was created and produced at the IU Media School as part of the Beautiful Thinkers podcast, IU Edition. To follow along this season, check out the Beautiful Thinkers Project on Instagram and LinkedIn. Special thanks to our students who researched and recorded this episode, Jax Cordis, Ariana Jones, and Mesa Munn.